Most events are forgettable, not because the people running them don't care, but because they're optimizing for logistics instead of memory. I'm Jay Minash, Senior Director of Strategy and Growth at Exhibitus, and this is Event Experience Experts. Every episode, I sit down with the creatives, strategists, and senior leaders who are raising the bar on what live brand experiences can actually do. If you're done accepting forgettable, you're in the right place. My guest today has spent over 20 years building what's become one of Canada's leading live experience firms, designing and producing everything from a 5,000 person medical conference to internal leadership events for one of Canada's biggest banks. Recently, somebody handed him the title of most influential person in events in Canada. He didn't exactly fight it. He said, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit here, not sure that's true, but let's go. That tells you most of what you need to know about how direct this conversation is about to become. Aaron Kaufman, president and founder of Fifth Element Group. Welcome to the show.
Man, I'm super excited to be here. Thank you for having me, and we're gonna keep it as friendly and Canadian as we can. So here we go.
I have to say, you are also the first person I've had on that I've never met before. I know we've talked on LinkedIn, but I've never actually had a call with you. We've never worked together, so this will be good. And listen, you're Canadian.
Super unpredictable. That's what you're telling me.
I got that from I did my research. I was looking at your LinkedIn post. I was like, all right, I think this is gonna be fun. I think I might make some people on my team a little bit nervous, but I have a few guests like that lined up that I'm like, hey, I don't know what this person's gonna say, but we're gonna have them anyway because it's gonna be entertaining.
Yeah, I don't know if I want to make people nervous, but uncomfortable, I'm all good with. So
That's fair.
Let's get into it.
So I'm gonna segue before I jump into those questions. There was something I saw in a recent, I want to say it was about a month ago. You posted about award winning and whether that actually matters anymore. And I'm curious, tell me more like why you think that.
Yeah, I mean, I always push back on people and say, well, what's the legitimate award in the industry, right? And I think, this will probably actually be a really good foundation for a number of the things that you're going to want to talk to me about. But ultimately, what is the foundation of the industry, and what is, how do we represent ourselves when it comes to awards, when it comes to, all of the things that go into building a proper industry, right? Like if there are awards, for example, for all creative industries, but if I said to you, if you're in a creative industry and you could win one award, right? Where are you going, and what award is it? A lot of people would say it's the Cannes Lions, right? Now, whether you love it or don't love it, it seems that tends to be considered a legitimate program. In our industry, however, like sometimes I win awards and I'm like, I've never even heard of these people. How,
Yeah.
where did I win this? And so, a lot of it is clickbait and other things, right? I just think that, I will say before getting too long-winded that with the growth of social media, and when I started my business, there was really not a lot of social media. One of the things that happens is when you have peer-to-peer evaluation for awards programs, well, when I post something on LinkedIn, Instagram, anywhere else, and I have peers, competitors, and otherwise evaluating awards programs, they already know it's my work, right? I don't want to use the word enemies, but I tend to make, a lot of interesting relationships inside the industry because I speak pretty frankly and candidly on what I think about it. So ultimately, do I think that competitors, peers, and other people want to see me win all the time? I don't think they do. And so, that ultimately puts me in a position where I look at it and go, is this really legitimate? Like, who's voting on this? Who decided this? They already know my work anyways. And so, I've really backed off from trying to win awards over the last, 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, no, I thought it was really interesting because early in my time at Jack Morton, we're talking like 2014, I was invited up to the head office to present capabilities because I had a meeting in the area. They're like, oh, let's hear Jay present. I was like, the CEO, the CFO, it's like, I'm so nervous for this presentation. And we get to literally, it's like the third slide of the presentation. It's like all the awards. And I'm like, hey, can I actually stop a second? I don't really like this slide. I don't like having it right up front. And the CEO, he's actually like, let me tell you why it's here and why it matters. And what he said is like, listen, we obviously know we have great work. We think we have great work. But when you hear it from others, and to your point around the industry that are telling, everybody is telling. Now, I think it depends on where this is being voted by and who it's being voted by and all that. But it did change my perspective a little bit. And I think clients do like to see it. I saw another point of view that it's like, sure, you love awards, creative this, creative that, but it's like, how is it impacting your client in a positive way? And that is kind of your point as well.
And I think I would also say to you, like, from an impact perspective, like, if I've been doing this, as you said, over 20 years, and, someone's been doing this 2 years, and we're both award winning event professionals, producers, designers, whatever else, where is the differentiating factor? Right. So how am I different? And in fact, it could make me look worse because I'm 20 plus years in and I have the same credibility as someone who's 2 years in, right? In terms of awards and stuff like that. So where is the differentiator? How am I saying, but this award I have is legit, real, serious, and this award this other person has is like some random thing?
I mean, I'll say there are definitely tiers of it. I mean, it depends who it's coming from. Like an event marketer award or an X award, I think holds a
Sure.
little bit more weight, obviously. But yes, also it's like, oh, cool, I was on this list of the top 50 most influential. It's like, what? Who? I've literally never heard of this website, let alone the company. So yes, no, I think the awards are kind of funny. It is definitely clickbaity to a certain extent. But yeah, I think you have to weight them, and I think that's really where we'll agree. All right, so now I'll jump into my real questions, and I think maybe this ties into that first one.
Yeah.
So, what's a belief you hold about live experience that most people in the industry would push back on?
Yeah, I think the definition overall of live experience, right? And so we always find ourselves in this position where, and especially when you go on LinkedIn, everyone's an expert, right? Everyone's saying, here's what you need to do. And we're the only group of people, right? And I don't call it an industry. I'll get into that a little bit, but we're the only group of people who's always saying, we need to, we need to, we need to, right? The truth is that you don't need to at all. What a live experience is exactly what you want it to be, right? So people will go into it with their own perception, idea, whatever else, right? For some people who have never seen something like it before, crossing a big bridge, over a canyon, that's the most unbelievable live experience. But if you've done it 1,000 times, it's not really a big deal anymore at all, right? Some people will go to a new location they've never been to before, they never imagined, and they're so overwhelmed because of the experience of it. So a live experience is what you expect it to be, what you hope it will be, and what you want it to be. It's not dictated by me, no matter how curated I think the experience is.
Yeah, I think it kind of goes along with the whole like this thing is dead or that thing is dead. It's like, everybody comes up with like this big general statement of like this is what we need. So I think you're right. I think talking about what people need and want, it's like it's so dependent on 100 different variables, probably more than that in a lot of cases. So yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense.
I also
Well,
see, I would say this too. I see a lot of people walking around saying, doing what you did last year isn't a strategy. But let me tell you something. It's almost sometimes the best strategy because the truth of the matter is that an experience, again, is just what the person is living through. And if they loved that experience, right? We're both sports fans, right? You go to MSG, I'm sure, and you watch a game and whatever else. The experience really isn't much different, right? But when you leave there, you always want to go back to the next game, right?
no, not always.
Not always. But you know what I mean? In fact, you might say, oh, I'd rather sit here, right? Because I think I get more out of it or be more fun or whatever. Obviously, you want to sit down at the glass or near the bench or whatever else. So you're changing a slight variable, but the experience of it generally is the same, right? And sports has been that way forever, and they add wrinkles and the screen changes and whatever, but a stadium or an arena is around for 30, 40 years often, MSG much longer, right? And what you find is that there really isn't that much change. In fact, people will go back at some point to a lot of the older places because they want the nostalgia of how they felt earlier in their lives, or they want to see, I used to go to Old Yankee Stadium a lot, and nothing changed there, right? It was, I would sit sometimes in different places. I'd go every summer, I'd go to see the monuments and do all of these things, right? It never changed. I always hated the Yankees. That never changed, right? But I would go because I could recall the previous time that I was there and the previous times to that, how great the experience was.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that to me is what I hold dear about experiences. It's just how it makes you feel. And doing the same thing with some wrinkles and changes, of course, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it gives you that same emotion and it evokes the same feeling you had, then great, right? The Yankees change their roster, new guys come, new guys go. That's what changes. That's exciting. But the product itself is really no different.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, it's like, I both get frustrated when it's like, well, we've always done it this way, but it's like you also don't need to recreate the entire wheel. I think to your point, you said it exactly what I was gonna say. Is like, let's add different wrinkles, let's do it slightly differently, but it's like the formula is still the same. The way we show up is still the same. It's like it's the feelings you're creating in people is really what we're looking for. They want good service, they want good food, they want good sessions, they want good connections. It's like if you have all that, the rest of it almost doesn't matter. I mean, maybe not doesn't matter, but yeah, I think I completely agree with you. All right. So speaking of changing things up or not changing things up, there's a lot of waste in event budgets, and sometimes, it's pretty consistent from show to show or event to event. Is there an area you see money or budgets being wasted most consistently? And assuming that is a yes, what would you do differently with that money instead?
You know what? The truth is that it's not necessarily money that I see wasted. I think that where the money really gets wasted, if you ask me in the process, and I'm going to deviate slightly from, what I think you might have been hoping for. The money gets wasted because the initial person or company that gets engaged in an event or a live experience is the wrong partner to start with. And so where your money actually is going when you engage a marketing agency and allow them to be responsible for your events, or a PR agency or whatever else, the 30% or 40% that comes off the top before anything happens, for them to just call me, that's where your money's being wasted. That's your experience money gone, right?
Yeah.
And so how many times have I gotten a phone call from different agencies, different places, and they basically said, hey, listen, we've already pitched the client on this idea, right? And they've put, 34 people in a room all making $750 an hour, and they're, all these things to come up with some kind of like fire and ice theme. And then they call me and go, we've promised the client a fire and ice theme. And I say, okay, how much money do you have? And they say, not near enough. We have, $40,000. And I'm like, but you just probably took a fee of double that, right? And so how am I supposed to do, and I'm using arbitrary numbers, right, obviously, but how am I supposed to do a $100,000 event for $40,000? Right? And so that's really where the money is going. I think alternately, the other thing that you have is you have people who are planners or producers who really don't know anything other than, what they've been taught somewhere by somebody. And what they do is they call 10 different suppliers and they allow themselves to be sold to, right? So when I call a supplier, if I don't really know what I'm talking about or what I'm doing, I'm basically inviting them to sell me something I really don't need, right? Mm-hmm. And so ultimately you have uneducated, unproven producers and planners and designers who are just saying they're either, have a really nice website, or they, I could say some other things, but nevertheless, you end up in a situation where all they're doing is relying on partners. And when every partner comes in 10 or 15% over budget, which naturally happens all the time, how does a planner who doesn't know anything figure out how to reduce? So what they're doing ultimately is they're just saying, okay, we need to cut costs, and the event ends up looking like, I won't swear, cut cost. Help your marketing person.
Thank you.
And that's it, right? And so what you end up with is an experience or an event that really is missing the goal because it just wasn't curated properly.
Yeah. So what would you suggest for those planners or producers to show up with in the first place? Like, what kind of information should they have?
Well, I think that they should learn how to do the work, right? So at Fifth Element, what we do is we have a creative and a production team in-house, right? And so we do all of our own creative, our own design work, and our own production layout. So when I do call an AV partner, and I'm very honest, right? We don't own AV equipment, but we know what to do with it, where it should go, how to write a rigging plan, how to make a lighting plan, and whatever else. So we do that work. We call our AV supplier and we say, hey, we're at this place. This is our stuff. Can you tell me what it would cost to do this? Do you have any suggestions in case we just weren't aware or missed something because we're not absolute experts in that. So what I'm doing is I'm doing the work. At that point in time, I also get to appropriate the budget. Some events for me, and I make the same amount of money. We charge a fee. We're fee-based, right, as a percentage of the spend. And so I make the same amount of money whether I spend 90% of the budget on decor or 90% of it on lighting. But if I was just a planner who didn't really know what to do, right, how could I ever appropriate where the funds go, because I really don't know. And so in some events, it's really a lot about the furniture, the layout, the look, a really cool custom bar, and then it's some uplighting and one rig of truss, right? And that's what the event requires. So to me, that's really the piece that's missing so much, is that the industry fragments at a speed that's alarming. The people who are opening agencies or companies or working out of their mom's basement or whatever else they're doing, they just don't have the knowledge base to understand how to do this right. And so money just goes out the window, and then companies either are paying agencies or they're paying unqualified people, and then they don't want to do events anymore because the results aren't there, right? And so now you're finding that this is where people are bringing it more in-house. They're trying to figure it out, because they're buying agencies like mine, and we're seeing a lot more contraction lately.
Oh yeah.
Because now you can get an agency like mine in-house, and all of a sudden you don't need to funnel money elsewhere. You don't need to worry about your agency eating up half of it in fees, which is like lighting money on fire. You don't need to worry about any of that stuff, and you can get dollar for dollar a much, much better program.
So, and all of that makes sense. And, doing the work, obviously you're going to learn. It's kind of like talking about AI. It's like, cool, AI is helpful, but it's like if you don't have that expert level above it, it's like it's basically useless and going to give you a generic AI slop, as they say.
Absolutely.
In events, how do you do the work? Like, say you're entry level and you come into this world, and I think it's one of the biggest challenges in our industry. It's like you can major it now in certain places. There is like an event management major now, but it's like, how do you get that experience, or how do you get that know-how, or what information do you look for? Is there anywhere you'd recommend people go?
Yeah, work for companies and stop trying to be something you're not, right? So we have a tendency in this industry to forget that big companies are better, right? You don't see people go to work for General Motors on the assembly line and open a car company the next day. Right?
Fair.
It just doesn't happen. And so what people have forgotten in this industry is that when you build companies establish capital. When companies have capital, they grow, you grow, right? You get promoted, you do this. Now, I'm not saying to stop enterprise and building companies. What I'm saying is that when you have so many companies in this industry like we do, where there's no overhead, no barrier to entry, we have no code of ethics, we have nothing. Well, what happens when you have nothing to pay out other than what you need to live, and you're working out of your mom's basement, or you living with your spouse or whatever else, and you're working in a little office, it's nothing. You can work for less and less and less and less and less, right? And so that's what happens. My real perspective on this is that companies, right? That companies need to grow. We need to find a way for bigger companies to either buy up smaller companies or, and I hate to say it, put them out of business. Because that's business. That's industry. We don't have an industry. We have a vocation.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's true. You really need no overhead. You need a phone and an email address, and you can be an event production company, quote unquote.
Yeah. So this has always been my platform, right? And this is something I feel passionate about. So imagine for a second that you decided to, as a group of senior event professionals, you decided to go out and say, this should be the bare minimum foundation, right? So the bare minimum to start in any industry requires capital, right? Whether you have to rent a place, if you're going to open, a restaurant, equipment, whatever it is, right? And so I would say to you, how do we set those things in play? Well, what if, for example, I taught every major client in North America, right? It could be the world, but I'll choose North America, that in order to hire a reputable person to run your events, the bare minimum should be a $5 million permanent liability insurance policy, which is in play 24/7, 365. You can't just buy it for this. Okay, so now what I'm saying to you at the very least, right, is that you probably have to have $20,000 to $30,000 sitting in the bank on day one when you open, so that you can buy that insurance policy annually, right? Well, guess what? Number one, I guarantee you that most of the people who start event companies don't have that money lying around, right? And number two, if they did, they'd think long and hard about whether or not it's worth it. On the flip side, if I could teach major clients and people who spend real money that that's a thing that you need, well, it would stop people from fragmenting so fast. If I could go further to that and make sure that venues don't allow people without that basic foundation in there, then I could stop it altogether. So that's just one tiny little barrier. Forget education, forget all these things. I'm just putting a need for capital in place, not even knowledge.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
You want a party plan and you can, mom or dad's going to buy you that insurance policy? Knock yourself out. Now it's up to a company to determine whether or not you're legit. That's up to them.
Yeah, I mean, I never thought of that as a strong measure of like the strength of a company, the size of a company, the realness of a company. No, I think that's a really good answer. So I'll move off the budget waste question. We'll move on to the next one. Let's talk about like an actual event. What would you say is the difference between an event that gets talked about in the room and then where we really want it to be talked about 6 months later?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think that one really, requires a little bit of understanding of what your goal is, right? I do think that events sometimes lack goals, right? So sometimes it's shock. I'll tell you, I've worked with Gary Vaynerchuk before, right? We all know Gary, right? And so, we brought him in for a conference which was not anything to do with the basis of what he's an expert in marketing and advertising. And so why did we bring him in? Well, other than the fact he's an awesome guy and an awesome speaker, and I was super stoked to meet him and hang out with him, so that was cool. We brought him in because we wanted people to still be talking about his message, right, months later. And we achieved that goal. Do I think it was, something that it was around a real estate conference? And so do I think that people were still talking about the overall trade show and event 6 months later? It wasn't that exciting, right? We did well, but it wasn't that exciting. But do I think people were still talking about Gary 6 months later? Oh yeah, right? And so that's the difference. I think it's that kind of, the thing that people are afraid to do, that's kind of that magic part that people talk about, right? We brought Gene Simmons to talk to a bank.
Nice.
Right? Now, why, right? Well,
wait, did he come in full costume? First question before you keep going. All right.
The bank wanted somebody who could talk about their life in service, customer service, and obviously if you've ever seen Gene Simmons work, whether on his show or whatever else, he's the consummate professional when it comes to sales and how he represents himself and whatever else. Sure, he says a lot of things that are questionable, right? Clearly we had in the contract that he's got to be a little bit more careful than that. But ultimately, the client was scared, everyone was nervous. When we got the survey results back, and everyone knows if you get a 70% approval rating on a 1,000, 1,200 person type of thing, you've done really well. We were up around 94% on this. And so that's what's going to get talked about, not because he spoke about banking, but because he had an impact greater than that, right? And I think that that's really where that magic part is. Again, you have so many people who are like, well, if you're going to do something on banking, you better bring in the banker, right? And so it's not even about, should we do experiential learning? Should we do, putting someone on a stage isn't good enough anymore. No, it is, right? But if I'm going to put someone on a stage, I'm going to put Snoop Dogg on a stage, and I'm going to talk about, growing business or persona, and so I'm going to make it relatable to the subject matter I need to, but I'm going to use tools at my discretion that are going to make things memorable.
Yeah, no, I really like that. And I think honestly the first thing you said about it comes down to the goals and what you want to be talked about in 6 months from now. And Gary Vaynerchuk, obviously a very charismatic speaker. Gene Simmons, obviously a few people have heard of him before. Funny side story, my grandfather, who had a bakery when I was a kid, actually hired the original Kiss drummer when he was pre-Kiss drummer to work at the bakery, Peter Criss. So
Cool.
But yeah, a little side note I had to throw in there as I was thinking about it. But but you're right though. I think sometimes the keynote speaker being a superstar celebrity is not always the best fit. It's not always going to bring that return. But if you are able to connect it to the message and you are able to make them, it's like, oh, remember that conference that Gene Simmons spoke at, and they remember the bank or whoever they spoke at, and that is definitely a way to make it memorable for sure.
Yeah, and I think, it's not about once, I always said from the beginning when I started my company, once something's been done once, to the chagrin of everyone in our industry, it's been done, right? So experiential is not experiential anymore. It's just a launch or an event, right? And so I remind people constantly that, like, when you say, or when somebody says, not you, but when someone says, we have to change this up, we've got to do this way, we've got to be experiential, we've got to, learning methods and this and that. Come on, like, this has been going on for 10 years. It's not new anymore. You're not doing anything. You're just following someone else's footprint, right? And so just say that. We think learning is better in a different environment, or we feel for our group that this is going to be better than that, or whatever else. That's okay.
Mm-hmm.
But don't try to make it always like, we have to change the format to make it more experiential. We're going to do this in the round this time because, that's exciting. It's the content that gets people excited. Nobody leaves a conference and says, you know what, that was in the round, I'm going to remember that.
Yeah. No, I think that changing it up from year to year in that respect is super helpful. And there's a book I read that's called Steal Like an Artist. It's like there is no original idea anymore. It's just old ideas that are brought to you differently.
Sure.
Where I will say, and I use this a lot when I'm presenting to clients, like, hey, we want to see something we've never seen before. It's like, well, you've never seen it, but that doesn't mean we've never seen it. Because to that same point, it's like, I will pull from one industry. It's like, well, you guys are like a decade behind them, so let's show you something that they've done or they've thought. I use it in our world all the time in terms of like the sales process of events. It's like, most honestly industries are like this, but it's like if you look at software or AI or big tech companies, it's like they are so cutting edge with how they go to market, how they're selling, and it's like that's my cheat code. It's kind of the same for like when you're talking about producing an event. It's like, let's just bring in a new idea from a more cutting edge industry or someone that's just like, hey, this is cool, it'll work really well for you too.
Absolutely. And look, we suffer, right? Because we're always trying to sit here going, well, what can we do? What can we do? You don't need to do that, right? When I'm looking for things, I look at guys like, Kolya Doms, right? So Vok Doms out of Germany is a company that I admire a ton. Kolya is a guy who I look at a ton. He presented recently at something I was at called a digital doppelganger. And basically it's a new product for them that allows them to measure the impact of a conference before you actually do it. So you can make AI guests and attendees and everything like that, and they can measure what the impact will be and what the results will be so that they can adjust the conference in advance, right, to match the attendee. And I was blown away by that, right? And I think there are tools that we can start to use to help structure how we can leave a better lasting impact. But I don't think that we need to be, that's an original piece. That's not something that every company can do or will do, right? I think most of the time it's just about looking around and being, what is cool right now and what are those organizations doing? F1's had a moment, obviously. FIFA is having a moment to my chagrin because it's ruined my summer. All of these. So I think you look at that and you talk about what's the presentation like there? What's the feeling like there? How are they getting this message across? What's going on? And you take from the moment, right? Put your spin on it, be creative, but it's okay to take from the moment, right? Maybe you're taking a trend from Japan. Maybe you're taking a trend from somewhere, wherever else, right? But it's okay to take that and make it feel like it's your brand. And that's why for us at Fifth Element, it was so key that no matter what iteration of the company we were in, that we always managed our own design work. So when people call us, it's not just like, you do a great job, you produce great events, you won awards, all that nonsense, but it's, we want your brand, we want your style, right? And that's something that can be individual for us. right?
I like
But
that.
are we making original events all the time? No, we're researching, we're learning, we're growing, we're evolving, and then we're putting our own little spin on something to make it feel like it's our brand of work.
No, I love that. That's how I approach LinkedIn. It's not that I'm writing anything original. Anytime I post anything, I mean, sometimes it's literally about my own life, so that's
Sure.
original.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's exactly that. I read something, I see something, I experience something. I'm like, here's what I think about that thing, and it's the same. I like that style. It makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely.
So you talk about things like Gary Vee speaking, Gene Simmons, Snoop Dogg, things that are obviously very memorable. How do you know something like that, or just an experience in general, is working, but not necessarily like again after the show, but it's like in that moment of the event, like how do you know it's working?
I think you see the look on people's faces. Again, it's just such a simple metric. Everyone's trying to, talk about metrics and data and whatever else. But, one of my favorite words that I use with my team is serendipity, right? It's just, there's something about an event, if I go back to sports, which I do a lot, you see your favorite player, you are close enough, right? Like, I don't know if you're a Yankee fan in New York, but like, you get close enough to Aaron Judge, it's still exciting, right? Even though you're not, a child or whatever, it's just an exciting thing, right? The aura of Aaron Judge, right? For me, I was in Toronto when Joe Carter hit his big home run, and I'll never forget that. And I think it's just, the look on people's faces when something is happening that's impacting them, that's live and that's serendipity. It happens at sports, it happens at concerts, and it happens at events, right? And I think, sometimes people are like, oh no, they're on their phones. Yeah, sometimes that can be, a measurable piece where you're like, people are unengaged. But again, if you look around a room, the kids use oral. Aura is a big word, right? Oh, you're aura farming, or you've got aura, or whatever. Right? Fine. If I'm gonna be, if I'm gonna put it in that perspective, every event I do is aura farming, right? I'm looking for that big, like I'm looking for the people in the room who are just like, holy sh-. Sorry, marketing. But
Hey, we made it this far. We made it this far.
right?
Congratulations to us.
I'm looking for that, right? I'm looking for that. Oh my God, I've never seen anything like this. This is touching me or reaching me in a way that only a live event can do. And that's that serendipity moment.
Yeah, I mean, every event, it's like those serendipitous moments are typically my favorite. And I think where we focus on the results and the numbers and what we need to report back, it's like, well, there is a CFO or there is a board. And it's like, we also need, like, feelings are great, but you do need to have the facts coming behind it. But yes, I think in the moment, if you're doing a good job when you can feel it. You can literally feel it.
Yeah, and sadly, like, our industry just, we kind of try to lean into all of this nonsense about return on emotion and return on the, at the end of the day, sometimes it just has to be gut and feel, right? We have a ton of ways of measuring whatever, right? Clients always want it and cool, and we have a great formula for figuring some stuff out. But when I can sit down at a post-event meeting or a post-conference meeting or whatever else and just say, could you feel the electricity in the room? Right? If you're a wrestling fan, have you ever been in the building when, The Rock, Stone Cold, Hulk Hogan, all of those, when they walked in, could you feel the energy, right? Because that is what you're going for. And remember, those guys are actors and they're athletes too, and that is a live experience at its best, right? And
Aaron, I'm going to pull you back to a better feeling than any of that you just described, but because we are on the 1 month and 1 day anniversary from the Knicks being the world champions in the NBA, and I will tell you, yeah, but seriously, it's like I'm not the biggest Knicks fan. I was a big Knicks fan in the '90s. They were pathetic for 2 decades. It's kind of hard to stay in love with a team that's that bad. About 3 years ago, I got back into it, but I will tell you, this postseason run, even talking about it now, literally a month after, I'm getting chills just thinking about the joy it brought the city, the community, the happiness. It was crazy. And I even felt like, listen, the Yankees have won a bunch, the Giants. I'm a very lucky sports fan, I will say that.
Sure.
But when the Rangers won the Stanley Cup, I was in middle school, and it's like, yeah, that was amazing. I was super excited. If the Rangers won the Stanley Cup now, I would cry. because
Yeah.
of the emotion that's exactly what you're talking about, that and that feeling that these things bring you, these moments. And I love that. I think it's really, yes, of course we need to prove the budget works, but I also think it's so needed to be attached to the sales team to really know the effects of an event, and it just doesn't happen. Like it does, and there are certain cases where it's like they're in lockstep, or the CMO is in charge of it all and has all that information. But it's like it's so hard to measure from like, all right, we have this many leads, and this many leads have turned into this many meetings, and this many meetings to this many opportunities, and this many opportunities. You have your close percentage, kind of. It's never 100% accurate. So yeah, I think going with the emotional side of events and understanding it's like that felt great should have more weight than it really does. And it shouldn't, you hear more and more, it's like, oh, feelings don't matter. It's like, but they do. They definitely do. I wish we could put a number to it, is basically, which you can't.
Yeah, but you know what? I would also say that we have, if I go back to a point I made earlier about the fragmentation of the industry, right? And I just relate it back to that. What you end up with is you end up with people who you were just mentioning, CMOs, CFOs, CEOs, whatever, somebody that works at a company, and they're dictating what they want for the purpose of saying, I'm going to be in charge here. And you have the event person saying, yes, I can do that. Yes, I can do that. Yes, I can do that. Right? And that person who's dictating is not somebody who specializes in creating those moments, right? I am. And so in fact, before we got on a call, I was on a call with a client and I basically just said to them, look, I need you to stop telling me all the little places you want to fix and adjust. And, I get that you have a budget and we're working on it, but you need to let me create an event that's going to be up to the standard that you expect and get the results that you want, right? And she said to me, okay, great, I'll talk to you next week. Because she understood at that point that this is me asserting my expertise, and the only outcome I want is that moment, right? Or a number of moments for her guests. And so I think, again, it goes back to, yes, your example of the Knicks is perfect, right? The championships, all of those things, like that's what you're trying to create, but you can't have that if you're not able to be strong enough and experienced enough and, knowledgeable enough to be able to create that. And so you allow other people to do that for you.
Yeah, no, it's very well said. And I'm going to take a step back before I ask my last question, because you mentioned FIFA ruined your summer, and I need to hear more about how FIFA ruined your summer.
You know what? I appreciate big international events. Let me start there. I worked on NBA All-Star Weekend when it was here. I had an amazing time. I've worked on Olympic Games and Paralympic Games, and I've had a great time. Athletes are amazing. Countries are amazing to work with. I worked at the NBA Direct. They were awesome. I've worked with the NHL. They're awesome. FIFA, however, did two things that really just weren't ideal for our industry. So number one, obviously, that games were hosted in Toronto. And so what they did was they did two things, actually. First is they went in and booked up the city a few years ago, right? So it's summertime in Toronto, similar to summertime in New York. This is where all the groups come in, association groups, lots of travel, lots of, industry, lots of events happening. People want to be inside, outside. Well, nobody came to Toronto this summer because FIFA booked it up. So even if they want to do a large conference, there's no hotel rooms, so there's ballrooms that are empty and hotel rooms that are blocked, right? Then FIFA goes a few months before and they release everything. And then so brands don't activate anymore, right? So there goes that budget. And so what you had was, that's problem number one. Problem number two was that FIFA gave all of the money, in my case, to an American-based company, because who cares about the business of it? And the American-based company then said, we're going to spend all this money, and then slowly started to tiptoe back on that because FIFA cut budgets, because things weren't looking as good. And the American money held onto their money. They spent less here. Canadian companies did not do well. And the overall impact on GDP in Toronto was not much greater than it was in a regular summer. And I think they're saying it's 3 to 4 times less than when Taylor Swift spent 3 nights here last year.
Wow. Taylor Swift, nobody compares to the economic impact she can bring.
Sure, but it's FIFA, right? It's World Cup.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
no, it's disappointing to hear. I mean, they happen to be the most corrupt organization in the world, so none of this is like super surprising. But yeah, no, I can understand why that would ruin an event producer, of course, of all things, summer.
absolutely, and also soccer players fall down and cry too much. It really gets really gets on my nerves.
Oh yeah, that was honestly one of my biggest troubles of being even the NBA fan. It's like, did he like brush against you and that's a foul?
Right.
I mean, in the finals that was not the case. I will say they let those boys play, but yeah, no, it's
Absolutely.
like you see an NHL player. It's like, oh, he literally broke his leg and finished his shift, or he got 70 stitches and came back in the game. But yeah,
Yep, 100%.
before I go deeper into sports, so all right, my very last question, and you mentioned a company before that I've actually not heard of before, so I'm curious if you'll go back to that. But who in the industry is doing work that deserves more attention than they're currently getting?
Wow, I mean, there's some great people. So one of my mentors out of New York is Jeff Kalpak. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He is now at First as an advisor. He was the first person I ever met in this industry who managed to sell a company years ago. He started a company called Barclay Kalpak. He was a brilliant designer, still is.
Sounds familiar.
Yep. And he managed to sell a company to First. And he is someone who's been a mentor of mine for a long time. I'm very lucky to be able to reach out to him. So not just because of that reason, but he trailblazed something that I've always respected, which was a business environment first. Kolya Doms, same thing. So they're out of Germany. He's the most brilliant man in events. I think he figured out very early on what it took to take a business and grow it. And they are a real business, as is a lot of the UK and European companies, which we don't really have too much of here. So I think there's a number of people I could keep pointing out, but I think ultimately the people who deserve it are the people who are really pushing for growing companies. Right? I don't care about innovation. Innovation comes with capital and money and ideas and teams of people, right? You need a good team around you. Someone's going to come eventually with an idea and go, what if we did this, right? And then the other guy that I think comes in really super underrated all the time, though he's done so much, is David Adler.
Yeah, I know David. I met him. God, was that? At this point, it was probably 2 years ago at IMAX. I had breakfast with him. It was within a group. I'm like, oh, I know this name.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've known David for probably 20 years. The interesting part about David is he's done so much that people don't know about. But, I've attended things with him like Jeffersonian dinners and stuff like that. And he's willing to dig into the industry. We don't always agree on things. I think sometimes his, opinion and his ideas are very different than mine. I'd like to see way more progression, I think, in the industry. And he applauds a lot of people who I think are doing, things that, I might not think are advancing our industry enough. But he's been so relevant for so long and he's done so much. I just think he's underappreciated, as is Julius Solaris. And, Julius is also an old friend of mine. I never give him big praise because generally we don't always agree on things, but I love him because, again, he's willing to step out and say things. Now, whether it's for business, whether he believes it, whether it's, for writing, whether it's sponsored, he's doing the thing, right? He's running a business, media-based, and he's saying things, whether it pisses people off or not. And I love him for it, and I think, I hope he keeps doing it a lot. So those are four people. I think they're four pretty big people to me, pretty big names.
You've been doing this long enough, you'd be a part of the conversation, not just a fly.
I would hope so, though. They'd probably kick me out after I started giving my opinion. So
yeah, everybody's got an opinion. It's all right. Well, this was awesome. I don't know if I'd say better than expected. I didn't really have expectations. I just love having conversation with new folks. We only had one curse in a 45-minute episode. We're doing good. Thank you. Lara will thank you later. But no, this was, I really appreciate you coming on, and I think we've said it all.
Yeah, you know what? I think, it's always cool to do and be a part of new podcasts. I appreciate that you're willing to get the word out about the industry, and you're asking questions of people who are, willing to answer honestly. And I think that's the only way we move forward. So, appreciate your time and allowing me to be a part of it, and can't wait to see future episodes.
Yeah, absolutely. If you walked away with one thing you'll use, we did our job today. Event Experience Experts drops every week. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and check us out on YouTube if you want to watch. I'm Jay Minash. See you next time.